Okay, just a heads up. This is going to be a lot of information. You'll probably think it's more than what you need, but you're probably going to run into these issues. So it might be helpful for me to just go through all of my train of thought as I figure out how to solve the problem. Um, so that's my disclaimer. It's going to be a lot of information. So hopefully this will be helpful in that you can always refer back to it if you need to. And the more you mess around with Business Tracker, the more you'll learn about Excel, and some of this stuff will become second nature to you, I'm sure. Um, so it sounds like the issue that Dave has is this number, which seems a little bit low to him. So this represents the total number of transactions closed that are to close in 2018. So let's first look at what that number should be. So if I look at the sales input sheet, we can see that there are transactions included down to row 227. But you always have to remember that the first row doesn't count because it's not a transaction, it's just the heading. So there's actually only 226 transactions in here. So that's one thing to remember, that it's always going to be one less than whatever the last transaction is. So that takes us to 226. There's this transaction here that closes in 2019, which was talked about in the email. So that takes it down to 225. So the number should be 225. There's also this issue that was talked about in the email. This should be November of 2018. So that would count towards 2018. So really it should be 225. Take the 227 minus the 1 for the heading and minus this one, which closes in 2019. Everything else in here closes in 2018. So it should be 225. So for some reason this is 220 and it's not 225, and we have to figure out why. So anytime you want to know how the number or information in a cell got there, you can always look up here to what this says next to where it says FX. Whenever this information starts with an equal sign, like it does here, that means it's a formula. And so that number is being calculated, the 220 is being calculated, or it's being pulled from somewhere else in this sheet or in the whole file, meaning any one of these sheets. So we have to look at what the formula says to figure out how that's determined. It looks like the 220 is determined by taking the sum of cells P79 through P80. That colon right there means that it includes any cell in between these two. Now these are actually right next to each other, so there's no cells between them, but colons mean through. So P79 through P80. If it was a comma there, that would mean it would be the sum of just those two cells and not any cell that would be in between them. So it's summing up P79, which is this cell, there's P79, and P80. So that makes sense. I don't see anything wrong with this formula. It should be that it's calculating the total number of seller side closings and buy side closings from these two numbers. So it doesn't look like there's anything wrong with the formula there. So we have to go backwards and look at how these numbers are calculated to see if there's an issue there. So if I look at this number here and I look at how it's determined, again, it's a formula, it's calculated. You take the sum of cells D80 through O80. So that means it's adding up D80, which is right here, through O80. And if you hit Shift on your keyboard and then click, it will highlight all of the cells from the cell that you highlighted first, to wherever you click. I don't know if you knew that shortcut, but I'm just telling it to you because sometimes it makes it a lot easier. If you have to go like across a row or really far down a column, it makes it much easier than scrolling while you're holding down the mouse or the clicker. So that makes sense that this 111 would be determined by adding up all of these numbers for each month to get the total for the year. Same thing here. This 109 is determined by the sum of D79 through O79. So it's adding up D79 through, and I'm going to hit Shift on my keyboard and click on the one that I want to get to. So it's adding up all those numbers, which makes sense. It's adding up the numbers on the seller side for each month to get the total for the year. So these formulas look fine. So now we have to, again, go backwards to see if maybe the numbers here that are being used to calculate these numbers, maybe there's an issue with those. So I'm just going to pick one of them. I'll pick this one, December, seller side. So let's see how this number 5 is calculated. If you look up here, it looks like a really complicated formula. This is probably one of the more complicated formulas you're going to see. This count ifs right here is a code to Excel. Just like over here, this cell, you see the word sum, and that tells you to add up whatever is inside these parentheses, the cells that are inside these parentheses. The word count ifs is the same type of code that sum is. It's just a different code. So it tells Excel to do something very specific. Count ifs, it is what it says it is. It's telling Excel to count the number of occurrences if they fall under a specific set of categories. And those categories are listed here. And you can see each category by its color. So orange is a category, purple is a category, blue is a category, and magenta is a category. So we have to see what those categories are to figure out where it's pulling the numbers that it's using to get this 5 occurrences. So there's 5 transactions that were seller side in December of 2018 that are to close. So let's look and see what each color represents. If we look at orange, it starts off with sales exclamation point. Anytime you see a word with an exclamation point or the name of one of these sheets down here with an exclamation point, that means that this information is coming from a different sheet. It's not coming from this dashboard. So this means that this information is being pulled from the sales input sheet. If this said APPT exclamation point instead, meaning appointment instead, that means that that would mean that this information is coming from the appointment sheet. So this is coming from the sales sheet, and it's coming from, and you can disregard the price signs. I'm not sure why they get put in there, but they do. I don't know why. But it's coming from column K of the sales input sheet, and specifically it's rows 2 through 223. So K2 through K223 is where the orange information is coming from. So if I look at the sales input sheet and I look at column K, that represents the month closing. So I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind. The orange represents month closing. Purple, notice there's no word with an exclamation point. It's just a cell. So that means it's coming from a cell on the same page. It's coming from the dashboard. So if I look at 078 on the dashboard, 078 is December 2018. So again, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind. The orange represents month closed. The purple represents December of 2018. The blue, again, this category is being pulled from the sales input sheet and specifically column H. So if I look at sales input and I look at column H represents client type. So have to keep that in the back of my mind as well. So blue is client type. Magenta, again, there's no exclamation point or word in front of it, so this is going to come from this sheet, the dashboard, and it's coming from cell C79. So C79 is seller. So if I go back and make sense of all of this, what this is telling Excel to do that gives it this number 5, it's telling it to count all of the occurrences if, remember orange was month closing, so if the month closing is purple, which is December of 18, and if the blue, which was client type, is the magenta, which was seller. So again, to summarize, it's telling Excel to count all of the occurrences when the closing month is December of 2018 and the client type is seller. And when it counts all of those occurrences up from the sales input sheet, there were 5 times that happened. And so that's where that number 5 is coming from. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the formula and make sure that it's including all of the transactions on the sales input sheet. So if I look at this range here of cells, it's going from K2 through K223. So if I look on the sales input sheet, K2 is right here, and K223 is down here. So it's only including transactions down to row 223. So it's obviously missing these last 4 transactions. And if I look, all 4 of those transactions are seller side transactions. So it's not including all the transactions. So what we have to do is change this formula over here so it expands through the rest, through all the transactions that we have. So we have to change this 223. Now, what we could do, we could change it to 227, and that would make it include the whole way down to the bottom. But the problem with that is when you put in transaction 228, the formula on the dashboard is going to be wrong again because it's not going to include that 228. So what you can do is just expand the formula so that it includes literally all of the rows. So I can expand it down to 523, and even if there's no information in the cells for the formula, it's still going to count what it has information for. So if I go back here to the formula, instead of doing it down to row 223, if I expand it the whole way to 523, that will correct that. Or that will include all of the transactions, including future transactions that you put in to the sales input sheet. Now, you'll notice over here, this information comes from the sales input sheet too, and this only expands down to row 223. So I'm going to go ahead and change that, to 523 so that it goes the whole way to the bottom of the sheet as well and includes all the transactions. Now, once I've corrected the formula, you just press return or enter on your keyboard, and what you'll notice is the 5 that we had here changed to a 9 because now it includes those last 4 transactions that were seller side transactions. So this went from 5 to 9, this went from 109 to 113, and this went from 220 to 224. So now it's looking like it's looking better than it was before because this number should be 225. So we're still missing 1, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So this formula is wrong, or was wrong. It's now okay. It now includes all of the transactions that we need it to. The issue is that all of these other cells that are used to calculate over here don't have the right range either. They're all still only going to 223. The reason these numbers aren't affected is because the transactions that we're missing by only having it go to 223 were all December transactions. So really these shouldn't change even if we correct the formula. But we should still correct the formula just in case. So you might think you have to go through and manually change all of these, but you don't. There's actually a very fast shortcut you can use because Excel is super smart. And you can copy and paste formulas as long as what you're copying and pasting. So I can copy and paste the formula for this cell that we just changed and corrected, and I can paste it into any cell that's calculated the same way. So what I can do is I can right click and copy that cell, and I can highlight all of these other numbers that are calculated the same exact way, they're just for a different month. So I'm gonna select it from there the whole way across. I'm gonna hit Shift and click on that to highlight all of those. And I'm gonna right click and paste. And what that will do is it will correct all of these cells the same way that I corrected this cell. So if I go across the row and I keep my eye up here just to see, notice how the 223, when I pasted, changed to 523. And if I go the whole way across, so if I click across with my keyboard and I keep my eye up here, all of those cells have been corrected to include all the rows down to 523. The only thing that changes in the formula as you go across is the purple, which is the month, which should change. So that whole row now has corrected formulas to include the whole spreadsheet from the sales input sheet. I should do the same thing for the buy side. So if I go down to December for the buy side, again, you'll notice this is not correct. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to go in here and change that from 223 to 523, and the same thing for the H, 523, and hit enter. Now you'll notice the number didn't change, but that's because we weren't missing any of the buy side closings for December. So I just corrected this cell. Now all of these cells to the left of it are calculated the same exact way, just for a different month. So I'm going to copy this and then highlight all of these, shift click, and right click, paste, and it didn't change any of the numbers, but they shouldn't have because they were already included in the formulas. But if I look up here, the formula has changed for all of those cells. It's now expanded down to row 223 for all of them. And the only thing that changes is the month, which is what it should do. So we've corrected literally all of these formulas so that it's now including all the transactions that are entered into the sales input sheet. The issue still is that we only have 224 total closings. There should be 225, but we know that there was one that was inputted to close in 2017, this one, but it should actually close in 2018. So if I correct that and go back, and sometimes there's a delay, but if I go back now, it's 225 because this number right here was 14, and when I changed that transaction closing date to November of 2018 instead of 17, it added that occurrence here, so it went up from 14 to 15. So that's how you go about fixing the problem. One thing to keep in mind is because I'm guessing this this sales input sheet was recently expanded so that you could, because before it may have restricted you from adding new transactions. I'm guessing somewhere around row 223. Because this has been expanded, it's very possible that there may be other formulas in the dashboard that have the same exact issue that these cells did, in that they only go down to row 223. So I wouldn't go through the whole dashboard and see if that issue is there. But if Dave, in the future says something's up with this number on the dashboard, you know that this issue has happened here. It's very possible that the same issue where it just wasn't including enough rows could happen somewhere else. So you might want to kind of keep it in the back of your mind so that you're not racking your brain too much if it's the same issue, and you can correct it the same way by simply changing the formula to include the full range of rows in the sales input sheet. So that's that. And I'm going to stop it, but I have another video to send you to.